evening and welcome to Interface. My name is Thembi Samakhele. Well, last week, Wednesday, the Minister of Finance, Pravin Gordhan, delivered the 2017 budget speech. Some political parties believe this was a balanced speech with a focus on economic growth, jobs, boosting investor confidence, and avoiding a sovereign ratings downgrade, mixed in with pro-poor elements and higher taxes for the wealthy. So how will all of this affect you? To discuss it further, I'm joined by Duma Qgubule, who is the Director at the Center for Economic Development and Transformation, as well as Owen Nkomo, the CEO at Inkunzi Wealth Group. As always, if you would like to take part in the discussion, we welcome your thoughts on social media. If you want to find us on Facebook, it's at Interface on SABC or at Thembi Samakhele, and then also on Twitter, you use the same handles. Welcome to both of you gentlemen, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having us.
So the way it usually works, Duma, is that the President will lay out the broader plan in the State of the Nation address, and then the Minister of Finance comes in and lays out how that plan is going to be executed. Looking at what the big plan was in the SONA, which was the radical economic transformation route, how was that interpreted in the budget?
Thembi, I just want to make out a point that I do not agree with the elite consensus that our economy is well managed. Our economy is not well managed for the 9 million people who are unemployed. It is not well managed for the 6 million people who are working poor, who earn less than 3,500 rands a month. So it doesn't work for 70% of the workforce, our economy. So the second thing is that...
Okay.
Yeah.
Before now I bring you back to the question, let me take you up on that. Yeah. Why doesn't it work? What's going wrong with it?
Because 9 million people are out of the economy. They don't participate in the economy. The majority, the half of the people who are working poor. They earn less than 3,500 rand a month. And so it is working for a minority of the population, maybe 30% of the population, who earn more than 3,500 rand a month.
Okay.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is that ultimately the objective of economic policy against which we should evaluate the budget is that what does it do to increase average living standards? Now, the minister in his speech said that over the past 25 years, average living standards increased by 1% a year. That is a really shocking number. It is, for me, it is evidence of the lack of performance of this economy over a very long period. So if you look at other countries, developing countries, the fast-growing developmental states, they double the size of the economy every decade. They grow at an average of 7% a year, these countries. Yeah. So in South Africa, we have lagged behind whatever period you use, every similar economy over a similar period. The third thing which I want to bring attention to, the backdrop to this budget, is that we've had a growth collapse since the global financial crisis. So between 2009 and 2016, our average GDP growth rate was 0.3% per capita. That is another shocking number.
But I do want us to talk about growth a little later on. But
yes.
The question I'm asking is, what then in the budget that was presented says we are shifting towards radical economic transformation?
Okay, so for me, my definition of radical economic transformation is broader. It's about bringing the majority of South Africans into the economy, the 9 million who are unemployed. The unemployment rate for black Africans is 41%. So you have 41% of black Africans not participating in the economy. The most radical thing we can do is to create opportunities for them to create employment. But now what happened over the last 80 years after the global crisis is that unemployment increased by 3 million people from 6 to 9 million people. And there is no plan in the budget to reverse what we're talking about, you know. So what I'm saying is that we are faced with the worst post-apartheid crisis, and there was nothing in the budget that focused on the growth.
So there was nothing radical.
There was nothing radical
in this budget for you.
The minister, if you look at it in detail, what he said, he gave generic principles of transformation and platitudes around transformation. There was no substance to what he said. Let me give you an example. The allocation for the SMME ministry was cut from the last budget to 3.9 billion from 4.3 billion. Now, in the National Development Plan, they say they want to create 10 million jobs, and 90% of those jobs must come from small business. Now, how on earth are you going to create those jobs with an allocation of 1.3 billion a year? It is totally impossible. And then the second thing is that the Black Industrialist Development Program, I was shocked when I looked at the estimates of national expenditure, you know, the big document that comes with the budget, is that the budget allocation for that was 127 million rands over 3 years. Yeah.
Let's pause there. Owen, was there anything radical in this budget for you? Something that said, yes, we are having a policy shift here?
Not at all. And I'm glad you asked that question, because we've had a lot of rhetoric about we are going radical, we want to do it, we want to introduce radical economic change. And I think that in as much as the minister didn't have many options in terms of, collecting more money and allocating it to those things that can drive the economy, I think that he had a chance and an opportunity to exploit, the ability to reduce government expenditure, which is totally, in my view, sits in his hands together with the presidency, obviously. But I do think that if you're in a space where you're not growing your tax collection, you need to be cutting your government expenditure.
Where would you suggest he cut?
Well, for a start, I would go straight to the army. Why do we need a bloated army when we're not actively fighting any wars, for example, in Southern Africa, where we would necessarily benefit from having a peaceful neighborhood, as it were, and I'd also reduce the government civil bill. It's too much.
Just a quick one on the army. They'll tell you we are living in very dangerous times. Terrorism is a real threat for every country, and South Africa needs to be prepared. Why would you want to shrink that army?
I mean, it hasn't made sense for me why you've got such a... Even if you move away from the army, the government civil wage is just a very big portion. I think Duma would give you the exact percentage in terms of all the government expenditure, how much money goes to pay government salaries. And the question is, do we have an efficient system when it comes to employing and maintaining people on the government wage bill? We've got some people that I do believe potentially have served the government long enough and well enough for them, and they've created enough of a nice nest that could be given a voluntary severance package, and then I think we would help the government start to reduce some of its costs. And I do think that there's quite a lot of points, if you look aggressively at the budget, that leaves, these inefficiencies resulting in the government overspending where it should not overspend. And I think that the defense of the expenditure is not great, in my view. As we've seen some of the people defending some expenditures in KFC out in the Eastern Cape, it's ridiculous. And you sit there and you think that, do these people really know how to manage hundreds of millions effectively enough for these millions to generate jobs in the system?
We've got to take a short break, but I do want to highlight for our viewers just what the breakdown is. So education, basic education gets about 16% of the budget. Post-school education and training is 5%. Health is 12%. Defense is 13%. Economic affairs, 14%. Human settlements, 13%. Servicing our debt, which is something I'd like to talk to you about a little later, is 10%. Agriculture and rural development, 2%. General public service, 4%. Social protection, 11%. Now, if you look at where we have been with our past budgets and what this budget is outlining, is there any change? That's the question I'm going to ask you right after this break. Stay with us. Welcome back. This is Interface, and we're talking about the 2017 budget with my guest, Duma Qgubule, the director at the Center for Economic Development and Transformation. Owen Nkomo is the CEO at Inkunzi Wealth Group, and talking about just how some of the allocations in the budget will likely affect you. Now, before the break, we highlighted just what the breakdown would be. If you look at that compared to Duma, other years, rural development, which was something that was spoken about a lot before the budget was tabled, and social protection, we thought that maybe there'd be more of an increase than what we saw there. Those things, did they indicate that we have actually made this shift we talked about?
I think the percentages for each allocation have stayed constant over a long period. But I would like to bring attention to a bigger issue here. You remember I said we grew at 1% per capita over 25 years. Now, if you look at the last 20 years, I think for 15 of those 20 years, we have been in fiscal consolidation, austerity mode.
Okay, just explain what that is.
Well, that means where the government is in the phase where it's cutting expenditure. Now, you can't cut expenditure forever. So what I believe is that the Treasury, the institution, the mindset is geared towards all the time fiscal consolidation. Now, what I'm trying to say is that I don't agree with Owen.
Yeah.
The what you call it, the national economy doesn't work like a household budget. You know, when a household is in trouble, you have to cut spending, but the economy doesn't work like that. So we need the opposite. I believe that what we should be looking at is to put more money into the economy, and I've advocated for a massive fiscal stimulus that we have to do. And the other thing that we must understand why we got to where we are. And one of the reasons for it is our interest rates. Since January 2014 to now, the Reserve Bank has been increasing interest rates by 200 basis points, despite the massive increase in unemployment. So there is no other way to get the economy going except to have expansionary monetary and fiscal policies.
Owen, how do we grow this economy if government cuts spending?
So in my view, there's two issues that I think need to be understood as well about us as South Africa living in a world where everyone has been introducing austerity measures. You're finding that in some of the countries that we may be comparing ourselves to, they could sustain the ability to expand the government's fiscal expenditure without necessarily hurting the economies. You know, it's been done in the developed countries, but those guys are able to do that because the people in those countries do know that, you know, we cannot rely on the government forever. You know, in my view, every government has a responsibility to look after its people, you know, the social responsibilities that the government has to spend money on, make sure that people who are unemployed are taken care of. But the challenge for me is that we sit as a developing country and we're not collecting enough tax to be able to look after all of these people that are not working. And if you look at the number of people that are employed and are paying tax relative to the number of people that are dependent on those people that are paying tax, in my view, it's unsustainable. And what I wish I could see happen is a government that says, like Duma said earlier about the SMMEs, create a budget that's sustainable enough for those SMMEs to create more jobs so that we can reduce dependence on the government for those people that are unemployed. You know, and I think that if you continue to increase government expenditure at this stage, Brad Duma, I don't know what your feeling is about it, but I think that if you continue to increase government expenditure when we are already facing high levels of debt to GDP, I think you're probably going to cripple the system because the government, as in this budget specifically, they did not show creativity around the ability to find different sources of tax that they could target outside of the high net worth people and you know, people that you know, are earning more than 1.54 million rands. But where else is the government going to tap in for income if we're not creating an economy that is generating a wider tax base that will take care of the responsibility?
So two things that you're bringing up. Let's deal with the first one. Government debt standing at 50.7% of GDP right now. Is that really something to be concerned about when you compare us with other countries, particularly other emerging markets? Is it an alarming
It's
amount?
not an alarming figure.
Yeah.
I have to stress this. There's this, the rating agency, despite the fear-mongering by the rating agencies, South Africa is not broke. Our net loan debt is about 45.5% of GDP. And as you said, it's 50.7% in gross debt. Now, in the Eurozone countries, it's 90% of GDP. In Greece, it's 180%. In Japan, it's 200%. So to the ordinary man in the street, it sounds scary when the minister says that we have a debt of 2.2 trillion, but our economy is double that size. So I do believe that there's a lot of space for us to increase government spending. The economics was invented 100 years ago by the economist Keynes, and since then, nobody has ever come up with a way to stimulate an economy that is sluggish, except to spend more money into that economy. And I believe that we should, what the budget missed was not to look at innovative ways in which we can stimulate the economy. First of all, many countries, when they're in trouble, they go into their foreign exchange reserves. Number two, the level of funding in the Public Investment Corporation with 1.8 trillion rands in assets is obscene for a country with such high levels of unemployment. Yeah. So I believe that we could easily release money from the PIC into the economy without affecting the pension of a single of the 1 million pensioners or the 2 million people who work in the public sector. So those are some of the things that I believe we could do. We can also take on more debt. Now, in South Africa, we are lucky that 90% of our debt is domestic. So we're not like Greece, where most of the debt might be foreign. Only 10% of our debt is foreign, and 20% of the debt is owned by the government itself through the PIC. So we have to be We have to look at this as a wartime situation where we have to pull all the plugs to be able to stimulate this economy and create jobs.
Owen, the route that, the finance minister was always going to take was, go after the taxpayers, particularly the high net worth individuals. Anybody earning over 1.5 million rand a year is going to be hard hit. But is that not, the prudent thing to do? Because we're going into an election very soon, and you don't want to upset the apple cart just before that election by, going for VAT or, doing something else that's maybe going to upset those that earn a little less.
You see, last year's budget, when it came through, post the budget, we did a survey at our business, and it just came out as well in the market that people were expecting to see higher taxes being charged. But then again, we had municipal elections coming, right, in August last year. And once again, this year we're preparing for elections going into 2019. We've got the elective conference of the ANC. My worry and my concern is that I'm not sure that our budgets are very independent of the perceptions around the political impacts of a tighter budget that it would have.
But, Spanner in the works, what country's budget ever is free of the politics?
It's very difficult to do that, right? But I think that's why, in my view, when you talk about becoming more radical about stuff, in my view, I said, if there's enough money in the system, in my view, for the government to not necessarily always need to borrow, I do think if they adjust their budgets, they realign them properly. I've been saying to you before the show started, we've got north of 30 ministries. And all of those ministries have got deputies in the system. And they have directors generals in the system. Do we really need all this duplication? Can't some of these ministries be combined? And we should be able to increase efficiencies and save money from the budget without necessarily having to borrow. Yes, 50%, 50.7% is a percentage of our debt to GDP. May not necessarily be too big, but we are under the watchful eyes of the ratings agencies.
So it's a concern for you?
It is a concern for me.
All right, let's pick it up right after this break and hear if it's a concern for you. Hit us up on Facebook and on Twitter at Interface on SABC or at Thembi Samachele. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're discussing the budget and we have so little time and I'd like to get through so much. So let's see how much more we can ask our guests, Duma Qgubule and also Owen Nkomo, who are here to take us through the budget. Okay, so quick question. Why not see an increase in company tax?
That's another option that should have been considered. Let me just raise another one. There's a whole issue of fees must fall. That's a burning issue. And I can't understand for the life of me why the ANC government had to set up a commission to, it's not a big issue. We're talking about 20 billion rands that we need for fees.
Oh, the students would be up in arms if they just say that.
It's not a big amount of money. It's like about 1% of, it's 0.5% of GDP.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah, it's like, it's a smaller number. And in the budget, it's about what is it? Of the debt, it's 1% of our debt, and of the budget, it's 1.3%. So I believe that one of the ways which we can square this issue of the fees must fall, talking about the companies, is to increase the skills development levy. So if we each 1% increase in the skills levy raises about 20 billion rand. So if we increase that levy to like another 3%, that's 60 billion rands, and it solves the problem for a long time. Yeah.
Very quickly, I know
so I'm just talking about innovative ways to be able to...
Why do you think that didn't happen, though?
Once again, once again, they would have mentioned the difficult economy. They couldn't tax the corporates. After taxing the high net worth earners that drive these corporates, you don't really want to upset the very people that are employing the 70-odd% of the people that are employed. It's really difficult. And like Duma was saying, 20 billion is not a lot for fees must fall. And if you think about it, the government has made enough provisions, in my view, via NSFAS to make sure that even people that have got that earn up to 600,000 are still accommodated. And if you were to do the real numbers, these people that are employed that have been funded by NSFAS, they have to pay sometimes as little as 300 rands a month, or even less than that. So people may look at this differently, but I think that, in my view, the money's there. But the difference between where the money is and where the money needs to go, the middle here, something happens.
Something goes wrong
Something goes wrong in the middle. We need to administrate the budget allocation and this expenditure of that budget properly so that the money does eventually achieve what it's being distributed to do.
Let's look at the backdrop against which this budget was presented. Politically speaking, there's a lot going on. There's quite a bit of turmoil, including the finance minister himself and all of the legal issues that we've heard with him. Today we heard that the Hawks might be going after the deputy finance minister. We heard, there's a number of things going on. There's what's happening at SARS. There's, so many political elements. How did that affect this budget?
I wouldn't know because I'm not an insider. But
That's a cop-out. That's a cop-out. Put your ear to the ground. What did you read?
Okay, but what I would say is that for me, what was instructive was what happened before the budget. SABC Jonas, he came up with this amazing paper in the City Press where he says that all the policies that we've been implementing over the past 25 years, they've reached their sell-by date. And we should now start a new consensus about how to grow our economy. And I believe that unlike what happened in the first 2 decades, when Treasury, the dictatorial approach to economic policy, where they shut out any debate around macroeconomic policy, we have to bring those debates. And I agree with Mr. SABC Jonas that we really need a new consensus around how to manage our economy over the next 10 years.
Owen, we just saw on our screens Brian Molefe, who some say might be our next finance minister. That's something that's, on the table. How does all of that affect where we're going in terms of the direction of the country and this radicalism that we want to achieve?
Well, there's a lot of things you've asked right there, but I'll try and tackle just two issues. In my view, we have known Brian Molefe for a long time, from the time I was working at the PIC, the time I was working at the state-owned enterprises, and we do know that he made some impactful decisions while he was working as part of those institutions. He made sure, for example, that corporates in South Africa started to employ more black managers. He was very forceful about it. He had no qualms around bringing CEOs into his office because he held most of the shares in those corporates. So he was effective in making some of those decisions. But the big questions now that loom, the major question is that how do you, after the public protector's reports, before that whole saga is finalized, you now take that same man and you put him into parliament and create more talk around him possibly going to take the Minister of Finance's job, which personally I'm hoping that does not happen because it's got far-reaching issues. So I extend then to the next question, which is, we live in a country that's driven by sentiment globally. So if sentiment says South Africa keeps making decisions that are questionable, in the long run, something will give. Foreign investors may start to look at South Africa and say, there's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to us investing. And in fact, they've started to question those things. But some of the international investors understand that in emerging markets, this kind of things do happen. But I do think that, in particular for the ANC, I believe that there should have been room for them to be careful about the decisions they make going towards 2019. And I think all of those things are very important in my view.
Quick one. Did this budget boost confidence, particularly for the foreign investors that Owen was talking about?
I've got a different view. I don't think foreign investment is very important in the economy. It never leads economic development in any country. It's the icing on the cake. Okay. What drives an economy is domestic investment. So once the domestic investment happens, as you saw between 2004 and 2008, when we stopped this austerity mode, we created 2 million jobs. And what was driving those jobs? It was spending by the parastatal, spending by the government. So I think we have got experience of the type of policies that I say we should implement. And that happened between 2004 and 2008.
Will the ratings agencies be happy with this?
Can I just answer that one?
Yeah.
There's a misperception that the rating agents say we have a debt problem. We don't have a debt problem. I have to say that again and again. What the rating agencies are saying is that if your economy does not grow, you will have a debt problem. So debt problems are caused by lack of growth in the economy and not overspending.
But are they not also saying that we're not managing the economy well?
Yes, because it's not growing. Because if the economy was growing, debt would not be an issue.
Okay.
Yes, yeah.
All right.
I really think that I differ with Duma on many points. It's important. The opinions of the international investors and the ratings agencies are very key. Should we get downgraded on the perception that we're not managing our economy properly, we're not managing our debt properly, it's going to affect the man in the street when the rand weakens and inflation balloons.
And
I
we're
don't
not
think
just
we
talking
should.
about
I don't
people-
think we should stick to textbook economics. Let's stick to the reality. We don't control international perceptions and what
Right.
happens to the strength of the currency.
Our time's up. We have to leave it there. I wish we had another half an hour because I get the feeling that there's so much that you disagree on that it would make for a lovely, lovely show. But we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for making the time to join us. Join us again next week at the same time. Good night.